Guys, welcome back for day 22 of the 28 days of Black American History Month. Tonight I'm doing another reading. I actually intended to do something different tonight, but I'm gonna save it for tomorrow. Just cause I discovered it earlier this week, but then I started discovering all these other different things, and things just started to come just randomly, and yeah, the dots were starting to connect. It was really cool. So I think I'll share it tomorrow just so I can have it all set for everybody. But I ran across an essay by James Baldwin that I hadn't read, that I wanted to discover with you guys. So I think I'll just dive in. It's called A Fly in Buttermilk. You can take the child out of the country. My elders were fond of saying, but you can't take the country out of the child. They were speaking of their own antecedents. Never heard that one. I suppose it didn't anyway seem possible that they could be warning me. I took myself out of the country and went to Paris. It was there I discovered that the old folks knew what they had been talking about. I found myself willy-nilly alchemized into an American the moment I touched French soil. Now, back again after nearly 9 years, it was ironical to reflect that if I had not lived in France for so long, I would never have found it necessary or possible to visit the American South. The South had always frightened me. How deeply it had frightened me, though I had never seen it, and how soon was one of the things my dreams revealed to me while I was there. And this made me think of the privacy and mystery of childhood all over again. In a new way, I wondered where children got their strength. The strength, in this case, to walk through mobs to get to school. You've got to remember, said an older Negro friend to me in Washington, that no matter what you see or how it makes you feel, it can't be compared to 25, 30 years ago. You remember those photographs of Negroes hanging from trees? I looked at him differently. I had seen the photographs, but he might have seen one of them. I remember, he said, when conductors on streetcars wore pistols and had police powers. And he remembered a great deal more. He remembered, for example, hearing Booker T. Washington speak and the day-to-day progress of the Scottsboro case and the rise and bloody fall of Bessie Smith. These have been books and headlines and music for me, but it now developed that they were also a part of my identity. You're just one generation away from the South, you know. You'll find, he added kindly, that people will be willing to talk to you if they don't feel that you look down on them just because you're from the North. Okay? The first Negro I encountered, an educator, didn't give me any opportunity to look down. He forced me to admit at once that I had never been to college, that Northern Negroes lived herded together like pigs in a pen, that the campus on which we met was a tribute to the industry and determination of Southern Negroes. Negroes in the South form a community. My humiliation was complete with his discovery that I couldn't even drive a car. I couldn't ask him anything. He made me feel so hopeless, an example of the general Northern spinelessness, that it would have seemed a spiteful counterattack to have asked him to discuss the integration problem which had placed his city in the headlines. At the time, I felt that there was nothing which bothered him more, but perhaps he did not really know what he thought about it, or thought too many things at once. His campus risks being very different 20 years from now. Its special function would be gone, and so would his position, arrived at with such pain. The new day a-coming was not for him. I don't think this fact made him bitter, but I think it frightened him and made him sad. For the future is like heaven. Everyone exalts it, but no one wants to go there now. And I imagine that he shared that attitude, which I was to encounter so often later, towards the children who were helping to bring this future about. Admiration before general spectacle and skepticism before the individual case. That evening, I went to visit G, one of the integrated children, a boy of about 15. I had already heard something of his first day in school, the peculiar programs his presence caused, and his own extraordinary bearing. He seemed extraordinary at first, mainly by his silence. He was tall for his age and typically seemed to be constructed mainly of sharp angles such as elbows and knees. Dark gingerbread sort of coloring with ordinary hair and a face distinguishedly impassive, save for his very dark, very large eyes. I got the impression each time that he raised them, not so much that he spoke, but that they registered volumes. Each time he dropped them, it was as though he had retired into the library. We sat in the living room, his mother, younger brother, and his sister, and I, while G sat on the sofa doing his homework. The father was at work, and the older sister had not yet come home. The boy had looked up once as I came in to say, "Good evening, sir," and then left all the rest to his mother. Mrs. R was a very strong-willed woman, handsome, quite quiet-looking, dressed in black. Nothing, she told me, beyond name-calling had marked G's first day at school, but on the second day, she received the last of several threatening phone calls. She was told that if she didn't want her son cut to ribbons, she had better keep him at home. She heeded this warning to the extent of calling the chief of police. He told me to go on and send him. He said he'd be there when the cutting started, so I sent him. Even more remarkably, perhaps, G went. No one cut him. In fact, no one touched him. The students formed a wall against G and the interested, saying only enough, apparently, to make their interaction clearly understood, watching him and keeping him outside. I asked him, "What did you feel when they blocked your way?" G looked up at me very briefly with no expression on his face and told me, "Nothing, sir." At last, the principal appeared and took him by the hand, and they entered the school while the children shouted behind them, "Nigger lover." G was alone all day at school, but I thought, "You already knew some of the kids there," I said. I had been told that he had friends among the white students because of their previous competition in a soapbox derby. "Well, none of them are in his classes," his mother told me, a shade too quickly, as though she did not want to dwell on the idea of G's daily isolation. "We don't have the same schedule," G said. It was as though he were coming to his mother's rescue. Then, unwillingly, with a kind of interior shrug, some of the guys had lunch with me, but then the other kids called them names. He went back to his homework. I began to realize that there was not only a great many things G could not tell me, there was much that he would never tell his mother. "But nobody bothers you anyway?" "No," he said, "they just call names. I don't let it bother me." Nevertheless, the principal frequently escorts him through the halls. One day, when G was alone, a boy tripped him and knocked him down, and G reported this to the principal. The white boy denied it, but a few days later, while G and the principal were together, he came over and said, "I'm sorry I tripped you. I won't do it again." And they shook hands. But it doesn't seem that this boy has yet developed into a friend. And it is clear that G will not allow himself to expect this. I asked Mrs. R what had prompted her to have her son reassigned to a previously all-white high school. She sighed, paused, then sharply, "Well, it's not because I'm so anxious to have him around white people." Then she laughed. "I really don't know how I'd feel if I was to carry a white baby around who was calling me grandma." G laughed too, for the first time. "White people say," the mother went on, that's all Negroes want. I don't think they believe that themselves." Then we switched from the mysterious question of what white folks believe to the relatively solid ground of what she herself knows and fears. You see that boy? Well, he's always been a straight-A student. He didn't hardly have to work at it. You see the way he's so quiet now on the sofa with his books? Well, he was going to high school. He didn't have no homework, or if he did, he could get it done in 5 minutes. Then there he was, out in the streets, getting into mischief, and all he did all day in school was just keep clowning to make the other boys laugh. He wasn't learning nothing, and didn't nobody care if he never learned nothing, and I could just see what was going to happen to him if he kept on like that. The boy was quiet. "What were you learning in high?" I asked him. "Nothing," he exploded with a very unboyish laugh. I asked him to tell me about it. "Well, the teachers come in," he said, "and she gives you something to read, and she goes out. She leaves some other student in charge. You can just imagine how much reading gets done," Mrs. R imposed. "At the end of the period," G continued, "she comes back and tells you something to read for the next day. So, having nothing else to do, G began amusing his classmates, and his mother began to be afraid. G is just about at the age when boys begin dropping out of school. Perhaps they get a girl into trouble. She also drops out. The boy gets work for a time or gets into trouble for a long time. I was told that 45 girls had left school for the maternity ward the year before. A week or 10 days before I arrived in the city, 18 boys from G's former school, high school, had been sentenced to chain gang. My boy's a good boy," said Mrs. R, "and I wanted to see him have a chance." "Don't the teachers care about the students?" I asked. This brought forth more laughter. How could they care? How much could they do if they did care? There were too many children from shaky homes and worn-out parents and aging, inadequate plants. They could be considered, most of them, as already doomed. Besides, the teachers' jobs were safe. They were responsible only to the principal, an appointed official whose judgment apparently was never questioned by the white superiors or confreres. Child. The principal of G's former high school was about 75 when he was finally retired, and his idea of discipline was to have 2 boys each together. I'm sorry. Let me just start that over. The principal of G's former high school was about 75, and he was finally retired, and his idea of discipline was to have 2 boys beat each other under his supervision with leather belts. Oh, wow. This once happened with G with no other results than that his parents gave the principal a tongue lashing. It happened with the 2 boys of G's acquaintance, with the result that after school, one boy beat the other so badly that he had to be sent to the hospital. Oh my God. The teachers have themselves arrived at a dead end, for in a segregated school system they cannot rise any higher, and the students are aware of this. Both students and teachers soon cease to struggle. If a boy can wash a blackboard, a teacher was heard to say, "I'll promote him." I asked Mrs. R how other Negroes felt about having had G reassigned. "Well, a lot of them don't like it," she said, though I gathered that they did not say so to her. As school time approached, more and more people asked her, "Are you going to send him?" "Well," she told them, "the man says the door is open, and I feel like, yes, I'm going to go on and send him." Out of a population of some 50,000 Negroes, there had been only 45 applications. People had said that they would send their children, had talked about it, had made plans, but as the time drew near, when the application blanks were actually in their hands, they said, I don't believe I'll sign this right now. I'll sign it later." Or, "I've been thinking about this, and I don't believe I'll send him right now." "Why?" I asked. But to this she couldn't or wouldn't give me any answer. I asked if there had been any reprisals taken against herself or her husband, if she was worried while G was at school all day. She said that no, there had been no reprisals, though some white people, under the pretext of giving her good advice, had expressed disapproval of her action, but she herself doesn't have a job and so doesn't risk losing one, nor, she told me, had anyone said anything to her husband, who, however, by her own proud suggestion, is extremely closed-mouthed. And it developed later that he was not working at his regular trade, but at something else. As to whether she was worried, no, she told me, in much the same way that G, when he asked about the blockade, had said, "Nothing, sir." In her case, it was easier to see what she meant. She hoped for the best and would not allow herself in the meantime to lose her head. "I don't feel like nothing's going to happen," she said soberly. "I hope not, but I know if anybody tries to harm me or any of my children, I'm going to strike back with all my strength. I'm going to strike them in God's name." Put your hand on my baby in the name of Jesus. G, in the meantime, on the sofa with his books, was preparing himself for the next school day. His face was as impassive as ever, and I found myself wondering again how he managed to face what must surely have been the worst moments of his life, of his day, the morning, when he opened his eyes and realized that it was all to be gone through again. Insults and incipient violence, teachers and exams. One among so many, his mother said that's kind of rough. "Do you think you'll make it?" I asked him. "Would you rather go to high?" "No," he said. "I'll make it. I ain't going back." "He ain't thinking about going back," said his mother proudly and sadly. I began to suspect the boy managed to support the extreme tension of his situation by means of a nearly fanatical concentration on his schoolwork, by holding in the center of his mind the issue on which, when the deal went down, others would be forced to judge him. Pride and silence were his weapons. Pride comes naturally and soon to a Negro, but even his mother, I felt, was worried about G's silence, though she was too wise to break it. For what was all this doing to him, really? "It's hard enough," the boy said later, still in control but with flashing eyes, "to keep quiet and keep walking when they call you nigger. But if anybody ever spits on me, I know I'll have to fight." Call me what you want to, but you spit on me, it's going down. His mother laughs to ease them both, then looks at me and says, "I wonder sometimes what makes white folks so mean." This is a reoccurring question among Negroes, even among the most liberated, with epithet is meant, of course, to describe the writer. The next day, with this question, more elegantly phrased, still beating in my mind, I visited the principal of G's new high school, but he didn't look mean, and he wasn't mean. He was a thin young man of about my age, bewildered and in trouble. I asked him how many things were working out, what he thought about it, what he thought would happen in the long run or the short. "Well, I've got a job to do," he told me, "and I'm gonna do it." He said that there hadn't been any trouble and that he didn't expect any. Many students, after all, never see G at all. None of the children have harmed him, and the teachers are apparently carrying out their rather tall orders, which are to be kind to G and at the same time to treat him like any other student. I asked him to describe to me the incident on the second day of school when G's entrance had been blocked by the students. He told me that it was nothing at all. It was a gesture more than anything else. He had simply walked out and spoken to the students and brought G aside. "I've seen them do the same thing to other kids when they were kidding," he said. "I imagine that he would like to be able to place this incident in the same cheerful, if rowdy category, despite the shouts, which he does not mention, of nigger lover." Which epithet does not, in any case, describe him at all. "Why," I asked, "is G the only Negro student here?" According to this city's pupil assignment plan, a plan designed to allow the least possible integration over the longest period of time, G was the only Negro student who qualified. "And anyway," he said, "I don't think it's right for colored children to come to white schools just because they're white." "Well," I began, "even if you don't like it, Oh, he said quickly, raising his head and looking at me sideways. Oh, I never said I didn't like it. Yeah, okay. And then he explained to me with difficulty that it was simply contrary to everything he'd ever seen or believed. Oh, child. He never dreamed of a mingling of the races, had never lived that way himself, and didn't suppose that he ever would. In the same way, he added, perhaps a trifle defensively, that he only associated with a certain stratum of white people. But I've never seen a colored person toward whom I had any hatred or ill will. His eyes searched mine as he said this, and I knew that he was wondering if I believed him. I certainly did believe him. He impressed me as being a very gentle and honorable man, but I could not avoid wondering if he had ever really looked at a Negro and wondered about the life, the aspirations, the universal humanity hidden behind the dark skin. As I wondered when he told me that race relations in this city were excellent and had not been strained by recent developments, how on earth he managed to hold on to this delusion. How on earth? He managed to hold on to this delusion. I later got back to my interrupted question, which I phrased more tactfully. Even though it's very difficult for all concerned, this situation, doesn't it occur to you that the reason colored children wish to come to white schools isn't because that they want to be with white people, but simply because they want a better education? Oh, I don't know, he replied. It seems to me that colored schools are just as good as white schools. I wanted to ask him on what evidence he had arrived at this conclusion, and also how they could possibly be as good in view of the kind of life they came out of and perpetuated the dim prospects faced by all but the most exceptional or ruthless Negro students. But I only suggested that G and his family, who certainly should have known, so thoroughly disagreed with him that they had been willing to risk G's present well-being and his future psychological and mental health in order to bring about a change in his environment. Nor did I mention the lack of enthusiasm evinced by G's mother when musing on the prospect of a fair grandchild. Nor did I mention the lack of enthusiasm evinced by G's mother musing on the prospect of a fair grandchild. I got it now. I remember she was talking about bringing home a white baby, but I got it now. The first thing that came to my mind after I read this the second time was, if she can't use your comb, don't bring her home. A mess, child. Oh, my people. Where was I? Using the prospects of a fair grandchild. There seemed no point in making this man any more a victim of his heritage than he so gallantly was already. Still, I said at last, after a rather painful pause, I should think that the trouble in this situation is that it's very hard for you to face a child and treat him unjustly because of something for which he is no more responsible than you are. The eyes came to life. Then, or a veil fell, I found myself staring at a man in anguish. The eyes were full of pain and bewilderment, and he nodded his head. This was the impossibility which he faced every day, and I imagined that this tribe would increase in sudden leaps and bounds was already increasing. For segregation has worked brilliantly in the South, and in fact in the nation to this extent, it has allowed white people with scarcely any pangs of conscience whatsoever to create in every generation, only the Negro they wish to see. I'm gonna read that one again. For segregation has worked brilliantly in the South, and in fact in the nation to this extent, it has allowed white people with scarcely any pangs of conscience whatsoever to create in every generation only the Negro they wished to see. As the walls come down, they will be forced to take another harder look at the shiftless and the menial, and will be forced into a wonder concerning them which cannot fail to be agonizing. It is not an easy thing to be forced to re-examine a way of life and to speculate in a personal way on the general injustice. What do you think, I asked him, will happen? What do you think the future holds? He gave a strained laugh and said he didn't know. I don't want to think about it. Then I'm a religious man, he said, and I believe the Creator will always help us find a way to solve our problems. If a man loses that, he's lost everything he had. I agreed. Struck by the look in his eyes, "You're from the North," he asked me abruptly. "Yes," I said. "Well," he said, "you've got your troubles too." "Ah, yes, we certainly do," I admitted, and shook hands and left him. I did not say what I was thinking, that our troubles were the same, and that unless we were very swift and honest, what is happening in the South today will be happening in the North tomorrow. And that's a word. by Father James Baldwin, okay? That's a word. It's a word for you on the 22nd day of Black American History Month. Come on. That was the first time I read this. I skimmed over the first paragraph, but I didn't even really get into it. Honestly, the title, "Flying the Buttermilk," I love the title, and I'm curious what this is about, and I thought it'd be cool to experience for the first time with you guys. My thoughts. Like everything, it's consistent with today. So many takeaways. There was a movie, and I don't remember, when he was talking to James Baldwin with his mom, the kid. It made me think, I forget the name of the movie. I cannot think of it to save my life. I'll have to find it. Maybe I'll I'll update the post or something. I don't know. I'll find it though. But it was about this black family moving and integrating the son into an all-white school, and the struggles that he was going through while he was in the school, how it was affecting the family, and all of these things. It was a really good movie. I have to find it for you. But I guess what it's making me think about is just I come from a small town. And even to this day, although, the schools are somewhat integrated, which schools are the black schools and which are the white schools. It's very much so segregated. It's very much so certain parts of the town, are segregated, which is not to say you might not get one black family or one, XYZ family in certain areas, but it's a very segregated town, city. It's technically a city, but it's a town. Yeah, very segregated. And I know what that's like. Granted, my school was definitely it's predominantly black, but it was a mixture, more so than some of the other schools, which were predominantly white. And just the idea that can exist, and even talking to friends who ended up going to other schools, or rather the more predominantly white schools, yeah, just hearing their experiences was very interesting. And then too, moving forward, and even me going to college, I went to a PWI, and child, I could talk about that all night. And I found myself in a lot of predominantly white institutions, just throughout life. And it's just really interesting, just being me and being, who I am and coming from where I come from. And just experiencing just like, I can only imagine what that kid during that time was going through in those spaces where, there wasn't this like veil of politically correctness and like folks weren't scared to be racist or to be looked at as racist, like, and like the laws weren't in place. Like, those kids went through hell. I think about the kids, those pictures of just like those kids walking to school, being escorted to the schools, and like these adults like throwing things at them and like screaming all sorts of stuff at them and like threatening them and their families and things like that, which they talked about in the essay about whether or not any of that stuff was happening with them, which they said they, I guess, didn't necessarily experience it to the extent of what some others have, but like I couldn't imagine. But I definitely know the mental strain of going to a PWI, what it can do. One of my biggest regrets is not going to a HBCU. Granted, I feel like we always end up where we're supposed to be. And we always, we always end up where we're supposed to be. So like, I guess regret, where I am now is kind of like harsh, but had I known what I know now and had I known what I've missed out on, I probably would have I definitely would have went to a HBCU. But I gained a lot from going to the school that I went to, even though, there were struggles, it was hard, but even then, like, within the black folks who were at that school, like, we found community, we lifted each other up, I was a sociology and theater double major, and I was obviously doing my social work as well as, doing a full-on, like, liberal arts theater, situation where like our hands were everywhere. Like, they made it so that we were everywhere doing everything on the stage as well as behind the scenes. And I also was in a band and doing community theater and stuff like that. But in those situations, it was interesting. You know what? I feel like if I continue this story, I'm going to start spilling all sorts of tea that I'm not even trying to get into on this particular video. But in the sense of finding community, in those spaces, we created space for the black folks who were involved, who created the community in those spaces. So that's always nice, but I couldn't imagine going through that experience and not having other black people around. You know what I mean? And not having that sense of community, that camaraderie, that security. Because when anything went down, we definitely showed up for each other. Those shoulders just to like vent on and vice versa, and just people, just family, like camaraderie. I'm sure. Oh my God. And I mean, I've heard stories of folks who, who were the token black and not by choice. You know what I mean? But anytime you're the token black, it's just like, ugh. Like, I just rather not. But yeah, it just, I don't know. And just that, I guess the conversation with the principal of like, the difference between the North and the South, and just like the passiveness and like the political correctness of it all, the like trying to evade the truth and then using God like as a crutch. And it's just like, I guess that part in itself, like, makes me think of, like, not only, like, how, stay with me, how religion was, like, forced on us, during slavery. Christianity was forced on us during slavery, but like how religious these racist people have always been. Like these anti-black people using the Bible, which I don't even know, because like, again, I think I mentioned before, which I feel, what we did with the black church is just something different. Like what we did with Christianity, what we do with Christianity is different. Just in general, it's our own thing. I grew up Baptist. I'm not the most religious person now, but me and God are like this. And yeah, that power, the idea of these anti-black racist people using God in that vein, it just makes no sense. It's I don't see the logic in it, I guess, is what I'm getting to. Like, I don't see, I guess there is no logic to it. It's racism and anti-blackness is a mental disorder. But just the idea, too, of, like, I guess in what just to connect it to yesterday, what I was talking about briefly, just the creation of like white supremacy, white fragility, and like anti-blackness and the caste system that was created in America, us being created to be a permanent underclass, us not ever sort of being intended to be citizens of this country and being made into a permanent underclass due to that in itself, us never being intended to be citizens, and this white supremacist infrastructure upholding that and using it to its benefit and capitalizing off of it, prisons and stealing our things and profiting, capitalizing off of them, mass producing them, mass distributing them all over the world, using our labor even still, and so on and so forth. White supremacy is everywhere. Capitalism is everywhere. It's all evil. It's all the same. It's all racist. It's all anti-black American. But I say all of that to say, what was I saying? I say all that to say, where was I going with this? I was connecting it to yesterday, just the creation of the system of white supremacy, white fragility, racism, anti-blackness, and ultimately all of that, again, from yesterday, the article, right, like them creating whiteness. Like, I'm not speaking about Caucasians as a race per se. I'm speaking to whiteness as in what it is and what it's manifested itself to be in this country, and how and how sinister and evil it is, but like how it's like I said, capitalism, it's the baby of capitalism, it's the baby of like just, oppression and like, I know what I'm trying to say, and it's so much, it's so vast and just, it's a lot. But like the idea within that black folks have always had to come up against this idea of, whiteness or white being better, white being given the better opportunities, whites being given the money to have the better education, to have the better schools, to have the better things, this government, this system upholding whiteness and giving them all of these privileges, and us having to make decisions for ourselves, for our children, to sort of maneuver that and to get the best outcome that we can. You know, the mother, you know, spoke about how her friends and family and the people in her community felt about it, and it was mentioned that although she didn't necessarily have anybody come to her and speak about, you know, how they felt about her and her decision, that people weren't happy about it. And it's like, there is no, like, she's not wrong for what she did. She was just trying to do what was best for her child. The community's, you know, disappointment or feelings about her sending her son to the school wasn't wrong per se. I mean, it was her kid. She could do what she wanted to do. But in terms of, like, the community and things like that, and, you know, they weren't wrong. They you know, nobody. It's tough. These decisions are tough that we have to make for our children, and, you know, again, she was saying, you know, there was, you know, a lot of the kids were getting in trouble. You know, there were some teen pregnancies and all of these different things, which had there been better circumstances, how, you know, the community would have been given all the things that they needed in order to thrive and survive, and all of these different things. You wouldn't have all of the crime. You wouldn't have all of these different dynamics happening, you know, and I just find it very interesting. There was something I was going to mention. What was it? That was something that I was going to mention. I should have just mentioned it while I was thinking about it. I'm having a brain fart. In terms of, what was I thinking about? I was talking about families having to make these decisions to send their kids to white schools. I guess I was going to speak towards just like, yeah, the idea that like white schools were better. And even how like, I've seen, and not to say that people think this necessarily, I've seen HBCUs be like looked at, down on, or like as less than from some people, and not all, like very few people, but like I've heard things, especially like when I was preparing to go to college and stuff like that. I didn't think that, because I had family who went to HBCUs and stuff like that, but like, yeah, just that whole idea of like people kind of like looking down, and like some of our most brilliant minds have come from HBCUs and stuff like that. But again, like it's that idea of like white being better. Definitely not in that case, but a lot of the time, you know, definitely not ever. let's be very clear. White is never better. But there are, again, from what I was mentioning before, like the government was issuing all of this money, all of this stuff, all of these different opportunities, uplifting whiteness and creating this uneven playing field. It wasn't equal. You know, it's never been equal. And then you take into account of like, again, the creation of whiteness, the creation of the disenfranchisement, the creation, you know, when you're talking about the redliners, when you're talking about, you know, the burning downs of all of these towns. We had tons of, over 100 black-owned towns out of slavery or something like that. The attacks on like Black Wall Street, the attacks on black-owned businesses and things like that. completely just sort of maneuvering us like a chessboard, like a Monopoly board, and like completely making it so that we don't have a chance, completely shutting us out. And then like you're talking about us maneuvering all of that and just trying to make the best decisions that we can to have a better future. Like thinking about the future. It's Black Future Month, right? Like thinking about the future, and really trying to give ourselves the best opportunities that we could possibly have. Just that whole dynamic is just tough. I remember, and I think I'll get to it. I was gonna bring up, the idea of integration just in general. Everybody was not for integration. Everybody was not for us being forced to go to these white schools, or like the mixing of the schools and all of these things. Like it quite literally was forced. A lot of people didn't want it. There were black schools that thrived. Black communities in general. It's definitely safe to say, like, we were better off collectively in terms of just like the wealth and black owned things and community and all sorts of different things. During segregation, we don't have nearly as much as we did in terms of just like collective wealth and all of those things, businesses and stuff like that, as we did during segregation. But I mean, times were tough. Times have always been tough under this system. But I remember, because my mom, for a short period of time, I think, during like elementary school, middle school, or like elementary school, I think, yeah, because one of my aunts, my mom's best friend, she was telling me about when they kind of integrated the middle school. Like I think she's a little bit older than my mom. They integrated the middle school. But prior to then, there was, in my town, there were like a couple of schools that were black-owned schools. And like my mom had attended them and would tell me about them and stuff like that. And folks, I remember us even just, it always was a thing before they burnt down, which folks have like all sorts of conspiracy theories about how it burned down and stuff like that. And I use conspiracy theory really loose, like these things are quite possible, especially when you're talking about people trying to like collect money off of like the property and stuff like that. Because the schools, at least one of them was abandoned, but and one of them was really nice, but they also, anyway, child, I could go on. But just like the idea of like being forced out of like your comfort and like forced to do something that is, potentially harmful, especially when you talk about like, I've read like all of these like studies and like just heard different like people who are in these sort of like fields where they have to like study these things talk about how black kids in like classrooms ran by white teachers, which, knowledge is knowledge, teaching is teaching, that's all valid. But our kids need to have teachers who are also black. Like our kids, I talk to people who would say they didn't have a black teacher till they were like in middle school, or like high school. And I'm just like, my first black teacher, if I'm not mistaken, I remember seeing black teachers around in like kindergarten, first grade. My first black teacher was in the second grade. Shout out to Miss Cotton. Hey, Miss Cotton. Who I still speak to this day. I love Miss Cotton. That was my favorite teacher, the nicest lady, y'all. She inspired me so much. I love you, Miss Cotton. So yeah, and then like I continue to have like black teachers. Like I continue to have them all throughout middle school, high school. Like I said, my high school was predominantly like black, so like that was never the issue. But like the idea of us not having that until like high school, that's crazy. That's insane. Um, yeah. So, and it's necessary, but then too, when you talk about like again the distribution of the money and how that goes into effect, like I remember reading, and I again have heard people talk about it as well. It's constantly been like rotation in these conversations. When you think about like, okay, a few things. So like the criminalization of the kids, the school to prison pipeline, quite literally, the prison industrial complex, all of that, like criminalizing our kids super early, writing them up all the time, sending them to the office, not allowing them in accelerated classes or whatever, which even looking back at my own school experience, the majority of the kids in the honors classes were the white kids. And that was, I forced my way up in there. I was like, I'm going to be up in here. I'm going to be in my honors English course. Let's go. Did the work, got the A. My school project, child, the one that I did, you know what? I did I did in high school, in my honors English course, we had to do a report. I forget what like the prompt was, but like I ended up doing my my school project on like racial slurs, the history of racial slurs. And I was saying them all too. I didn't give a damn. It's going in. Where was it going there? Oh yeah, but like the criminalization of black kids and like keeping them out of like the honors classes and like just creating these like stereotypical like and just completely like separating them from these other kids, separating them from the opportunities and things, criminalizing them, preparing for. Even when you think about like we had a school called ALC, which was like an alternative school for kids who would like get into trouble and stuff like that. A lot of those kids were black. I mean, you had other kids of other races and stuff who would have to go there, but like the school to prison pipeline, right? When you think about too, when you think about I want to give the proper name, I want to say remedial classes. I want to be really politically correct when it comes to that, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. The classes for students with learning disabilities and stuff. I remember hearing like, schools are given a certain amount of money per seat filled in those classes, sort of like prison. Like each cot, the government gets money for filling each cot. Similar, but like when you talking about like these teachers who don't know how to teach black kids, who don't know how to communicate with black kids, who don't who will like sit and argue. Like, I remember some of these, now that I think about it, some of these teachers who would just say all sorts of shit, you know what I mean, and just get away with it. And like maybe somebody's parent will come up there and curse them out and would give zero what about it. But like it would just happen, and it'll probably happen again. But like, yeah, just all of these different dynamics and stuff that make a learning environment for a black child like nearly impossible, you know what I mean? Or, at the very least impossible to get everything that they definitely should be given within that space. So yeah, it made me think about a lot of things. Definitely need more black teachers. I mean, there are black teachers out there who from what I see, are doing amazing jobs. I know they're doing amazing jobs. The black teachers that I've had have gone above and beyond to give back to the black students, and from what I see with my nieces and nephews and that sort of thing, god kids and stuff like that, they definitely have the support that they need. More black teachers, more black male teachers. I think I had a good chunk of black teachers. I mean, a lot of white teachers, but I had some black teachers. Off the top of my head, I want to say I remember 2 of them being black men. And that's throughout my entire school. Yeah. Mr. George and Mr. Means. Those were like my 2 black teachers that I had. Oh, and Mr. Pope. Yeah. So that's 3. He was a math teacher. Yeah. I think I probably only had 3 black male teachers. Which is insane. But what can you do? See if there's anything else I want to add on this already long video. Y'all know I will ramble. I will ramble. I guess I can tie all that back into the book. Because I've been rambling. The article I guess it was all tied in. All of it is valid. All of it is still something that we're discussing today, honestly. I just wish our kids would never had to even, think about those sorts of things. Like, I wish our kids could just go to black schools if they wanted. I wish our kids could always have the option. And sometimes you don't have the option. Especially too whenever you factor in, because I know in my town, like I said before, I grew up in a factory town, and a lot of the people who moved to my city moved there to work at those factories. And when the business was shipped to China and overseas, folks had to move for work. So whenever you take that into account and take into account of, I know where we were, the school districts, like, even if you lived, like, right on the outskirts of town, like, it had to be within the school district, or they wouldn't allow you to go to those schools. So a lot of people would use different addresses of, like, family and stuff to be able to go to the schools that they wanted, but it was something that they enforced. So when you take into account all of these things in terms of, like, parents having to move closer to work and those sorts of things, and where the schools are, and the demographics of the schools and stuff like that, that also becomes complicated. But that's also, again, to the systemic oppression of all, the creation of this, like, caste system and this class system, and ultimately, like, this super white supremacist, and I use that loosely. I'm really, like, written that term out of my vocabulary, but y'all know what I mean. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. That was something else I was thinking about. See, every time I do this, my last point. Just thinking about, again, like, the funding of the schools. Like, of course, like, white schools typically get more money and are better funded even to this day. It makes me think about, I saw a documentary about that, actually, and I wish I knew the name of it. What I was going to say was, I think it reminds me of just, like, how you see, like, a lot of these HBCUs being shut down and not being funded and all of those things. And it just blows my mind, because it's like, these are historically black colleges, historically black institutions. Like, when we couldn't go to school, these these were our schools. This is where we got our education. And it's just like the idea that our government doesn't see value enough to support that. The idea that our government, which we don't put too much trust in the government, like it's not it's not above anything that I think in regards to our government. But in terms of what it should be, especially considering, like, as descendants of American chattel slavery, not only did we build the country, not only did we build the wealth and were the wealth of the country, not only that that's enough, you know what I mean? We shouldn't. And see, this is the thing. We should never be going without anything. We should be a protected class. We should have free education. We should have free health care. We should have, our schools should never be going without anything. We should have so much shit. And it's not even just because, it's just because the fact that we built this motherfucker, like, the debt is due, and that's not even me asking. Like, the debt is due. Like, we built a lot of these white institutions with slavery. You see a lot of these, like, white colleges, predominantly white institutions, coming out and, like, talking about how, like, the institutions were literally built by slaves. Like, you talking these Ivy League schools, and trying to, like, dish out, like, BS amounts of, like, reparations and stuff, and, like, create, like, pathways for, like, black students to be able to go to these schools and things like that. But it's just like, that is the point. Like, we deserve so much more than we're given. And, black folks, we work hard for everything we have. That's black Americans. Can't nobody ever say that they gave us shit. Can't nobody ever say that they gave us shit. We work for everything that we have. And the fact that we don't make as many demands, I think that's what just is bothersome for me, because it's just like, we're deserving. It's not even us begging. It's not even us. No, we're deserving. The debts are due. The money, when I get into the video that I'm going to do tomorrow, blows my mind. Blows my mind. Talking about the land. Like, babe. But, yeah, I could go on, y'all. The idea was to come in and keep this short, but that essay was a good essay. And it just started just making my mind churn. Like I said, that was a first time read. I never read it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Of course, James Baldwin, you can't go wrong. But with that being said, y'all, that was day 22 of the 28 days of Black American History Month. I will be back with you guys tomorrow. I'm making my way through this Cicely Tyson, Just As I Am memoir. I'm making my way through it. The intent is to, on the 27th, have the discussion, y'all. I got some things planned for that, so I'm gonna try and get through it as much as I can. But with that being said, y'all have a good night. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see y'all tomorrow.